Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be doing the School Days book tag, which was originally created by What Victoria Read, and I was very kindly tagged by Shannon over at 155 books. I'll leave both of their videos linked down below in the description so you can check them out. But this is a tag that will transport you back to your school days, which is a concept that I think some people would be more fond of than others. But don't worry, this is not about reliving any high school drama or exam trauma. It is a super creative tag where the different portions of the day are split up into different prompts, and also the different school subjects are different prompts for you to recommend a book or share something about your reading life. So I'm going to kick things off with the times of day, starting with the first bell, and the prompt for this is to share a book that first got you into reading. I really don't remember much of my early reading life. Like, I do not remember any picture books. I don't remember any kind of toddler books or baby books. I don't remember my parents ever reading with me. The earliest memories I have of reading are probably when I was about 6 or 7 years old and I was reading independently. I really don't recollect anything from my reading life prior to that. Some of the books that really stand out to me are like the Horrible Histories books. I think I would go from one of those books to the next. I just completely devoured them. But I've also spoken quite a bit on this channel about how impactful Jacqueline Wilson's books were on my early reading years. The one that really stands out to me is the one that I think catapulted my reading was The Dare Game, which is one of the Tracy Beaker novels, and I remember being given this book by a teaching assistant, and I think when she suggested it to me I was probably a little bit too young to be reading it, in the sense I was reading quite ahead of what the predicted reading level was for someone of my age, and that teaching assistant really noticed how quickly I was getting through some of the books in our own classroom library, and from that point I read that first Jacqueline Wilson book and I just completely fell in love with her writing, and I demanded to go to the library as soon as I finished that one. I got loads of Jacqueline Wilson books out of the library, I read them all, and I remember the next time that I spoke to that teaching assistant I was like, oh yeah, and I've read this book and this book and this book. And that was something that teaching assistant just really encouraged in me, and I have so much appreciation that she noticed that was something that I could be propelled with and encouraged with. So yeah, that's a really nice reading memory for me. The next prompt is Break Time, the book you have most recently had to take a break from, or DNF. For me, this is unfortunately A Trick to Time by Kit DeWall, but I think this was definitely a case of a good book in the wrong time. This was the last audiobook that I was going to listen to for the Irish Readathon, and I was just rushing to get through it. I wasn't taking it in or appreciating it. I was getting caught up in that thing of needing to finish a book by the end of the month, and I realized I was just not giving this book the time and attention it deserved, and it's definitely going to be one that I will one day go back to. And Lunchtime, tell us about a book that features food. There were a lot of books that I could have gone for this prompt, and I really love books that feature cafes or bakeries or incorporate baking in some kind of way, just because it's something that I really enjoy and find really cozy. But the book I'm going to go for is Eat Up by Ruby Tando. Ruby Tando was on the Great British Bake Off a few years ago, and she's one of my favourite contestants of all time from that show. I love her food journalism and food writing that she's gone on to do after the show. This book is all about the joy in food, and I quite often have a very difficult relationship with food. I can sometimes fall into the thing of only seeing food as fuel and not something to be appreciated and enjoyed. If I'm not careful, I can also go for quite a long amount of time without eating properly. So the things that Ruby discusses in this book, which is a book all about the joys of eating and the joys of food, the things that she's discussing in this book were really, really helpful for me when I'm in that kind of mindset. She really encourages you to find the happiness in food and not be focused on dieting or being as healthy as possible. One of the sections in this book that has really stayed with me the most is a bit where she talks about cream eggs being seasonal eating. And she also takes a look at food throughout history, its depictions in art, on film, the significant roles that food has played throughout history, and how people's relationships with food can often be politicized. I love this book. I think it's just completely fantastic. The Final Bell, what is the book that you have most recently finished reading? Everything Under by Daisy Johnson, but you're gonna have to wait a few days to hear my thoughts on this because I will be talking about it in my April wrap-up. Homework, what is a non-fiction book that you have recently read and enjoyed. It's not about the burqa, which is edited by Maryam Khan. This is a collection of essays from a bunch of different Muslim women sharing their relationships with their faith and with their culture. It's a collection that is about giving Muslim women the space to speak for themselves, because they are so often a group that is spoken over or spoken for and misrepresented because of that. There are a real range of different experiences in this collection. Again, I will share more of my thoughts on this one in my wrap up. The staff room. Tell us about a book you go to when you need to take a breath. Now for this, I'm not going to talk about one book specifically, but I'm going to talk about a genre, because when I feel like I need either a palate cleanser or something to relax or something that I can just switch my brain off a little bit when I'm reading it, the thing that I reach for is middle grade. In the past year or so, reading middle grade has just brought me so much happiness and so much joy, and I think it's actually one of the most exciting areas of publishing at the moment. I think middle grade is often, for me, doing something that I don't get a lot when I read books for adults, in that it can also be issue driven without feeling like it's preaching or being heavy-handed, but equally it can offer me an escapism that I don't particularly enjoy in adult fantasy. What I really love about middle grade fantasy is that you are exploring it alongside this child character who is more often than not experiencing a new magical situation for the first time themselves, and you are going through that alongside them. It just has such a whimsy that I don't often see in adult fiction. And also sometimes if I feel like I'm being a bit slumpy with my reading, being able to get through a middle grade book quite quickly is something that gives me a lot of motivation or rejuvenation when it comes to my reading. So into the subjects. Now when a lot of people have answered these prompts, they have picked the subjects that they did for like their A levels, so it's like 3 or 4 prompts. I am Irish, I was educated in Ireland, I did a junior certificate and a leaving certificate, and for my leaving certificate I did 8 subjects. Let me see if I can remember all of these. I did English, Irish, maths, home economics, music, history, religious education and German. So I have had a little look at the prompts and seen which subjects match up with the ones that I did at school. There isn't a prompt for Irish language, but I will leave my Irish readathon playlist linked so you can get lots of Irish book recommendations if you would like. So for the subject of English, discuss a book that you studied in school. I've spoken about a few of the books that I studied in school quite recently, but one that I didn't mention was Felicia's Journey, which is by William Trevor, and this is about a young girl who is pregnant and she travels from Ireland to, I think it's Birmingham. It might just be England, I'm not sure why I think it's Birmingham. It's probably been about 10 years since I read this book, so but she is looking for the father of her unborn child, but he is not the person that she finds. She strikes up a very unusual and somewhat strange friendship with a man named Mr. Hilditch, who seems to have a track record of making bonds with young girls. I remember reading this and just feeling so tense when it came to this plot unfolding. I don't remember the exact minute details of it, but I remember the atmosphere in the classroom when we were reading this book, and I'd never felt that kind of like tension in a classroom before. As for a book that I would like to add to the curriculum, I think a book like Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give would be a great addition to any curriculum. I think this book is a great starting point to talk about issues of race and prejudice and navigating the world as a young black person. I just think this book is a modern classic. But specifically for an Irish classroom, I would also love to see Asking for It by Louise O'Neill on the curriculum. It explores the impact of religion in small Irish communities. It explores misogyny and sexism. It deals with sexual assault and a lot of issues that I think are really relevant for teenagers everywhere, but there is also that very specific Irish angle to this one. I think one of the amazing things about reading at that age, be it a teenager or younger, being a child, or even our reading as adults to be honest, but very specifically in that teenage reading space, is that it can allow a young person to build empathy for people that aren't like them, to begin to understand difficult situations in a safe space, and I think that's just really important. Then on to maths. How do you rate books? The answer is lackadaisically. So on my story graph, I do give books a rating and I do use the decimal system in that, but it's mostly based on just like feeling. It's not based on any particular criteria. I am thinking about things like how well it was written, what did I learn from this book, what did I gain from it, did it offer me a perspective that I hadn't seen before, was it something that I just really enjoyed and had a lot of fun reading. For me, I think the enjoyment factor is slightly more significant in the rating that I give the book rather than an assessment of quality, but I do also try to balance out what the book is trying to do. For instance, when I'm reading a picture book, it's unlikely to be an absolute favorite 5-star book for me in terms of like my own reading. But when I'm thinking about what it set out to do and the intended audience for that book, and whether I think it's a 5-star children's picture book for a child, in cases like that, I'm thinking more objectively than I am with other books. So it's a whole blend of different things that I'm thinking about, and ultimately I would say my rating system is somewhat inconsistent and really based on a feeling. And based on that 5-star scale, anything above a 3-star is a book that I have enjoyed. Like 3 stars is not a bad rating for me. If I had to kind of sum it up, I would say giving a book 1 star means I think it was absolutely awful. 2 stars kind of means that I didn't really like it, I didn't really have a good time, but you know, it's not dreadful. 3 stars means that I enjoyed the book. It's definitely nowhere near being a favorite book for me, but I can particularly see that other people might give it a much higher rating as well. 4 stars is kind of a weird one because it's like, I really loved this book, but there was just something missing that is stopping it from being a 5-star. And it's difficult to kind of describe what a 5-star is. Again, it's something that is just really based on gut feeling. Did I have an absolutely fantastic time reading this book? Was my reaction when I finished this book that I wanted to read it again? Did I feel like I wanted to push this book into the hands of lots of other readers? If that's the case, then it's 5 stars. History. Which 3 historical novels have you enjoyed the most? And if you don't really read historical fiction, which areas of history would you like to learn more about? So I don't really read historical fiction all that much, but a while ago I did read Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, and it is so rare for me to enjoy a big old book like this. I think sometimes I can struggle with historical fiction because I think some historical novels fall into the trap of like info dumping their research. Like if an author has really looked into the historical period that they're writing about and they're just putting in all of these details that we really don't need, but they're just showing off the research that they've done. And that isn't something that I really felt when I was reading this book. I have heard lots of really great things about the TV adaptation of this as well, so I really want to watch that, but I still have several seasons of Gilmore Girls to go, so until then. And what areas of history would I like to learn more about? I think I would like to read more books that are queer stories from historical periods, particularly stories of gay women or bi women from different periods of history. I've never read any Sarah Waters before, and I know I really should. I do have The Night Watch on my TBR, and it has been on my TBR for so long. Religious studies. Which book do you always come back to? My most reread book is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I have lots of different editions of the novel, which you can see up there. It's a book that I so often come back to if I need a form of comfort. You know, sometimes even if I'm trying to get to sleep and I'm struggling, I will stick on an audiobook of it just to kind of help me drift off. It's a book that I read as a teenager and really enjoyed. It was one of the first classics that I picked up for just my own enjoyment, not for an academic reason. But it went on to be a book that I studied in my 3rd year of university, and it really brought out some of the underlying themes in this book around education. I think if you are someone who is interested in the history of education, then the Alice novels are a really fantastic place to discover the different ways that people were criticizing the Victorian education system. So I have such an appreciation for these novels, but specifically the first Alice novel, because I just absolutely loved studying it. But it's also just something that I really enjoy the whimsy of, and I am able to kind of switch off the academic side of how I feel about this book and just enjoy it for the mayhem. Music. Which reading format do you think has the best rhythm for reading? I think it's really the way that I use lots of different reading formats that really gives my reading the best rhythm. So combining having physical books on the go, having an audiobook on the go, using my e-reader as well, I think it's incorporating all of these different formats of reading that really helps me get through books at a really great pace. The way that I most enjoy to read books is a physical book, but I love that audiobooks enable me to be able to multitask and consume books when I'm doing other things, when I'm doing chores, when I've gone on a walk, when I'm working. In terms of getting through something quickly though, I think the way I read the quickest is on my e-reader. I find it so motivational, having the little percentage and having the time that my Kindle predicts it's going to take me to read a book. I find that so motivational. So if we're looking for a speedy rhythm, then it's going to be an e-reader for me. PE, show us the biggest book on your TBR. Of course, it was going to be one of my Penguin English Library books. This is genuinely quite heavy. me. It is The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. I will read this one day. It will not be any day soon, but one day I will read it. I think it is something to do with a newspaper and cricket, which doesn't thrill me, but one day it will be read. Genuinely, I could do some exercise with this. And finally, Modern Foreign Languages. Recommend a translated book that you really enjoyed. So I have two books that are from the same kind of series, but you can read them independently. So Before the Coffee Gets Cold and Tales from the Cafe by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. These are books that just bring me so much joy. These are both translated from Japanese, and they are about a cafe where you can time travel, but there are a lot of rules and restrictions around how you can travel through time. So you have to be sat at this one particular seat, and if someone else is sat there, then you cannot time travel. You have got to wait. You have to stay within that cafe, and in fact, when you time travel, you have to stay in that seat, and you have to go to an exact point in history and kind of just hope the person that you want to be there will show up. Like, they have to have been in the cafe at that time. Nothing you can do can alter the present day or the future in any way, and you have to finish your conversation before your cup of coffee gets cold. And it's just this brilliant vehicle of exploring human relationships, and so many of the relationships in these books are just so touching. In many ways, they're quite melancholic books, but I think they're really beautiful. And that is it. That is the School Days book tag. I'm not going to tag anyone in particular to do this one, but if you haven't done it yet and you would like to, consider this your official tagging. My next door neighbor has just started to use an electric saw outside, so I guess this is pretty good timing for me to finish up filming. All of the books I've mentioned will be linked down below in the description if you want to find out more, and if you want to talk about anything I've mentioned in this video, do leave me a comment down below. Why is he so loud all of the time? I will speak to you guys in my next video.